Welcome to Humanities 2172 Online. We are in Frankenstein. We are in chapters 7 through 12 today. And there's really three things going on, and I want to talk about them and get to them quickly because I want this video to be less than 15 minutes so that it can be one YouTube upload. First thing today is we've got a lot of classical romanticism, which is these strong, vivid, beautiful descriptions of nature that are reflected in the feelings of the character. That's classic romanticism. The second thing we've got is the beginning of the story as the kind of Frankenstein horror story that we're all familiar with. There's the camera. And that is that you will remember little William dies, Justine's about to die, a lot of more characters are going to die. And when we think of Frankenstein, as kids, we hear Frankenstein, we think of this kind of like monster that comes and it wreaks havoc and it murders and mayhems and all that stuff. So that's coming in today's section. The third thing that's going to happen today is we're moving from Robert Walton was our first narrator, then Victor Frankenstein was our second narrator. Now we're moving from Victor Frankenstein to the creature as the narrator. So we're going to end up with our third narrative voice today. Let's jump into the first thing. On page 49, we've got Victor. You remember he created this creature in Ingolstadt. Then he ran off and left the creature to fend for himself. He gets sick. Clairval sort of nurses him back to health. They kind of have, college guy time. And then they get a letter from home saying that William has died. Young William Frankenstein, who's the youngest brother of Victor. So he returns home. Top of 49, he says, "Dear mountains, my own beautiful lake, how do you welcome your wanderer? Your summits are clear, the sky and lake are blue and placid. Is this to prognosticate peace or to mock at my unhappiness?" Skipping a sentence, "My country, my beloved country, who but a native can tell the delight I took in again beholding thy streams, thy mountains, and more than all thy lovely lake." Two things going on. One is these rich, vivid descriptions of nature, which the romantics love. They love nature. But secondly, the romantic notion that this nature has some kind of a connection to me as a human being. Obviously, all of us feel some connection to certain places. This place feels like home to me because I'm from the mountains, or this place feels like home to me because I'm from the coast, or if you are from, Kansas, I'm guessing that like sort of rolling fields of wheat or whatever is in Kansas feel like home to you, and tornadoes feel like home to you because that's where you're from. The romantics love this idea of a certain ethnicity being connected to a certain kind of person. So the fact that he's from Geneva, that he's from this area, give him a connection to this particular landscape. If we were in class, we would all talk about the kind of landscape that feels like home, and I would love to hear from you what that landscape is. Maybe put it in the comments or something of the discussion board. But the other thing that happens here is that nature becomes personified. Nature becomes that transcendent thing that is bigger than the human being. So we don't just get nature as like a beautiful reflection of who I am, but it's also something that might be more powerful than me and so can teach me something about my life. This is what he says. "Yet as I drew nearer home, grief and fear overcame me. Night also closed around, and when I could hardly see the dark mountains, I felt still more gloomily," right? So is nature sort of telling him that darkness is coming? Is nature sort of trying to send a message to him? That's what he believes. Let's go over to page 64, and I want to pick up on this idea of nature as like the bigger thing than human beings. This is the bottom paragraph of 64. "The immense mountains and precipices that overhung me on every side, the sound of the river raging against the rocks, and the dashing of the waterfalls around, spoke of a power mighty as omnipotence." We have not gotten a lot of God in this book, unlike most of our books that we've read so far, but we do have the omnipotence of nature, the bigness, the greatness, the transcendence of nature. "And I ceased to fear or to bend before any being less almighty than that which had created and ruled the elements, here displayed in their most terrific guise." So Victor here is in a connection with nature. He's not going to be ruled by anything except a thing as big as what could make nature. Still, as I ascended higher, the valley assumed a more magnificent and astonishing character. Ruined castles, hanging on the precipices of the piny mountains, the impetuous Arve and cottages every here and there peeping forth from among the trees, formed a scene of singular beauty. But it was augmented and rendered sublime by the mighty Alps, whose white and shining pyramids and domes towered above all, as belonging to another earth, the habitations of another race of beings. Two things going on there. One is that idea of the Gothic, which we talked about last time. The Gothic loves ruins. They love the old castles, the idea of antiquity. You remember Ozymandias was this big statue that had crumbled. And the second thing there is this idea of the personification or the anthropomorphizing of these mountains, that they have some kind of sentience or something like that, belong to another earth, the habitation of another race of beings. And so in the absence of kind of like a relationship with God, what Victor has here is a relationship not just with the landscape of home, but also sort of the bigness of nature. There are bugs everywhere. The greatness of nature. And I want to talk about a word, which is the sublime. This is the romantic idea that when you see something, it's not just beautiful, but it is also sometimes in nature so great as to be dangerous, or to make you very aware of your size as a human being. Often in romantic paintings, there are landscapes, which are these vast landscapes, and in the corner you'll see these tiny people looking at the vast landscape, and that's to show that nature is huge and we are small. Anybody who's ever tried to swim, say, in the ocean will recognize, you get out there, and even if you're a good swimmer, you realize pretty quickly, like, this is a big, massive force, much, much stronger than I am. And if I'm not careful, I could get lost in the thing because of how small I am and how great it is. Okay? So that's the sublime there, and that's romanticism, the depictions of nature that connect inside with these people. Okay, let's go to number 2. Let's talk about the horror aspect of the book, this idea of the book as like a horror novel. What is most poignant here, I think, is that we've got these murders. William is dead, and yes, the creature has killed him. Spoiler alert. Justine is going to get blamed for it. She's going to also be killed. And we've got Victor, who the whole time could step up and say, I know who did this, or I have a suspicion about who did this, but Victor doesn't step up. And we've got lots of examples here of Victor sort of making these excuses to us, the reader. Page 59. The poor victim, who on the morrow was to pass the awful boundary between life and death, felt not, as I did, such deep and bitter agony. This is when he's talking about Justine, page 57. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom and would not forego their hold. So he's saying, even though Justine is going to get literally hanged for killing William, and she didn't do it, I felt worse than she did. So in the middle of this like murder and mayhem, we have a character who could put an end to it, or at least who could explain it, and he is rationalizing it away, and he is making excuses for why he can't step up and say, this is my doing, right? This is my problem. And so we see that questioning, for me as a reader, that question of like, is the romantic hero who lives in his own moral universe something that we want to celebrate, or somebody that we want to not have anything to do with? And sometimes I feel like what I want to do to Victor Frankenstein is strangle him because he's making excuses for why he can't do the right thing. Let's move on. Let's move on to the third part. We're going to get in under 15 minutes. The third thing that happens today is that we meet the creature. The creature is now sentient. The creature is now able to speak, able to understand. The creature's been on a little journey, and we're going to hear about it. But in chapter 10, Victor's out in the solemn, majestic mountains, And what happens is he sees a lightning flash, and in that lightning flash he sees the big creature. And when he sees the creature, he knows who it is, and when the creature comes to him, this is how Victor addresses him. Page 68. Devil, do you dare approach me? And do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust, and oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims who you have so diabolically murdered. So we've got Victor here, who has seen his creature exactly once since creation, and that was when the creature came and reached out to him, and Victor bolted. And now the second time Victor's seeing the creature, he's calling him demon, and he is just saying, you're the worst thing ever. You recognize the problem here. This is Victor's doing. This is Victor's creation. And so even if the thing is a horrible monster, it's a horrible monster made by Victor. And so what we're going to see now is the story of the creature from the creature's own perspective. Let's go to page 69. He says, O Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. That makes sense. If you make a thing, if you make a kid, you have some responsibility to the kid. He made a 8 foot tall kid. Ugly, but he still has some responsibility. The creature says, remember, I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel. Sounds like he's been reading his Milton. He has. Whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend. And so what we see here is that the creature has learned, since being created, he runs out of Ingolstadt naked, and he puts clothes on, just like Adam. He also, in that scene, is very much like a child, like a baby. He seeks warmth by a fire. He tries to go into a person's house. They throw him out, they chase him out because he's big and he's ugly and he's terrifying and he's disgusting. And then finally in chapter 12, this section ends with him observing this family, the DeLacy family, who's going to be with us for several more chapters. He learns from the DeLacy's things like speech and the beginnings of reading, but he also learns that when he steals from them, they suffer. And when he helps them, then their life is easier. And so the creature is learning morality, and the creature is learning here how to live his life in a good way, but he has a couple of problems. One is that he's 8 feet tall, and the other is that he's very, very ugly. We'll close today with page 80. The creature's in the woods. He looks into a pool in the woods, and this is what he sees. He says, I had admired the perfect forms of my cottagers, their grace, beauty, and delicate complexions, but how was I terrified when I viewed myself in the transparent pool. At first I started back, unable to believe that it was indeed I who was reflected in the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensations of despondence and mortification. Alas, I did not yet entirely know the fatal effects of this miserable deformity. So the creature sees himself for the first time, like really clearly sees himself, and he sees that he is not ever going to fit in with everybody else. He's not going to become like the best friend to the DeLacy's because he is just so much different from them, and he looks so awful from them, right? So we have the beginning of the conversation in the book about what is a monster, who is a monster. We always say the Frankenstein monster. Is the creature a monster? Is the creature just different? And that's what we'll pick up with next time. Hope you are safe. Hope you are well. Take care. See you on Tuesday. All right. Bye.